The 5700X3D is the ultimate gaming CPU when it comes to performance per dollar. It's an absolute beast for the price, and there's no competition. That said, there are two newer X3D chips on the block that pack even more power, but with a steeper price tag and a less flattering cost to performance ratio. So today, I'm putting the 5700X3D, 7800X3D, and 9800X3D through the paces across 7 games: Valorant, CS2, DOTA 2, Squad, ArmA 3, Helldivers 2, and Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Whether you're building your first rig or upgrading your setup, this breakdown will hopefully help you figure out what makes the most sense for your budget. And hey, if this video helps you out, please consider using the affiliate links in the description to support the channel. Helps me keep making content like this, and I'd really appreciate it. So let's get into it. At the start of each section, I'll briefly explain the testing scenarios and settings used, because benchmarking numbers are only meaningful when the conditions are clear and consistent. Think of it like comparing sports cars. 2 lap times on different tracks don't tell you much, but when 2 cars run the same track, the results actually mean something. Similarly, FPS comparisons are only valuable when you know the racetrack, so to speak, or in this case, the settings and scenarios being tested. Now, let's dive into the benchmarks. Feel free to use the timestamps below to skip to the games you're most interested in. First up is Valorant. I used medium graphics settings and ran a round of team deathmatch on Piazza with each system. The 98 edged out the 78 by about 5 to 10% in average FPS at every resolution, with even larger gains in 1% and 0.1% lows. Both the 78 and 98 had significant improvements across the board compared to the 5700X3D. That said, the 5700X3D still delivered FPS numbers in the 400s, so while percentage differences were noticeable on paper, the actual gameplay experience wasn't all that different. This game ran incredibly well on all 3 CPUs. Next up, CS2. I used the high graphics preset with no upscaling and ran a round of team deathmatch on Dust 2 with each system. The 9800X3D and 7800X3D were neck and neck, with less than a 5% difference across the board at all resolutions. Both AM5 CPUs had a clear edge over the AM4 based 5700X3D in terms of raw numbers, but here's the thing, the 5700X3D was still averaging FPS in the 400s. So just like in Valorant, the percentage gains on paper were impressive, but in practice, the gameplay experience was excellent on all 3 CPUs. Honestly, without an FPS counter, I would have been hard pressed to tell which system I was on. Now on to Dota 2. For this test, I used the high but not maximum graphics preset and ran an online match on each system. The 9800X3D held a 15 to 20% advantage over the 78 at 1080 and 1440, but the gap tightened considerably at 4K. Both AM5 CPUs delivered significantly better performance than the 57 in this title. That said, this is yet another case where the numbers tell one story but the gameplay tells another. Even though the 5700X3D had the lowest FPS of the 3, it was still averaging in the mid 300s, so all 3 CPUs made the game feel smooth and responsive, so in practice they all delivered an excellent experience. Next up is Squad. I used a medium graphics preset and jumped into a live server running Sumari Bala with the 100 player cap. The average FPS gains between the CPUs were modest, but the real story here was in the 0.1% lows. While the FPS numbers were relatively close, the 9800X3D felt noticeably smoother during intense action with fewer micro stutters. The 7800X3D also felt better than the 5700X3D in this regard. The pattern was consistent across all resolutions, making the 98 the standout for overall smoothness in this title. Moving on to ArmA 3, I used the high graphics preset and loaded up the single player campaign mission, the East Wind, on each system. The 9800X3D had about a 20% edge over the 78 across all resolutions, while the 7800X3D held a roughly 30% advantage over the 5700X3D. The game played great on all systems, but the 9800X3D delivered an ultra smooth experience that really stood out. Each generational leap brought significant performance gains, making it easy to see the progression between these CPUs in this title. Alright, now we've got Helldivers 2. For this test, I used a medium graphics preset with the render scale set to balanced and played a level 7 mission on Gar Heron battling swarms of Terminids. The 9800X3D had about a 20% performance edge over the 7800X3D at all resolutions, while the 78 outperformed the 57 by 30% or more. The 9800X3D delivered a buttery smooth experience. The 78 was still solid but slightly less smooth, and the 5700X3D struggled the most, especially during intense fights with large swarms, even with these settings. FPS. The differences were most noticeable during chaotic moments of gameplay. Last up for this round of testing is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. I used the high-end graphics preset and ran the photo objective Las Vegas by Night mission for this test. The 9800X3D showed significant gains over the 7800X3D across the board, delivering a remarkably smooth experience. While the 78 and 57 were closer in terms of average FPS, the 7800X3D did feel noticeably smoother thanks to its higher 1% and 0.1% lows compared to the 57. This was especially apparent during complex scenes with lots of lighting and detail. Across the 7 titles tested, the 9800X3D showed an average FPS increase of about 14% over the 7800X3D at 1080p. The largest performance gap was in Flight Simulator 2024, where the 9800X3D outperformed the 78 by about 22%. Interestingly, CS2 performed almost identically on both CPUs even at 1080. When comparing the 7800X3D to the 5700X3D, the 78 averaged about a 27% increase in FPS, with Valorant showing the largest gap at 42%. In 1440, the 9800X3D delivered an average FPS increase of about 16% over the 78, with Flight Simulator again showing the largest difference, outperforming the 78 by about 37%. The 7800X3D, on the other hand, held a 26% FPS advantage over the 5700X3D at this resolution, with the biggest gap in Valorant again at 40%. Finally, in 4K, the 9800X3D had an average FPS increase of about 11% over the 78, with the largest gap found in ArmA 3, where it outperformed the 78 by about 22%. The 7800X3D maintained a 22% FPS lead over the 5700X3D at 4K, with Valorant again showing the largest difference at 36%. All three of these chips run pretty cool under load, but here are the actual average temps for each during testing. The 9800X3D was around 50 degrees, the 78 around 60, and the 5700X3D was around 52 degrees Celsius. In terms of power usage for this test, the 9800X3D averaged around 69 watts, the 7800X3D averaged around 59 watts, and the 5700X3D averaged around 62 watts. So like I always say on this channel, the 5700X3D is just an incredible value at around $200, $170 if you get it on AliExpress right now. It pairs easily with budget-friendly motherboards and RAM, and thanks to the longevity of the AM4 platform, it's an even better deal. A lot of people are still running older AM4 chips, and the 5700X3D is a simple drop-in upgrade with amazing potential. The 7800X3D is still a solid value when compared to previous high-end gaming setups, but it costs nearly 2.5 times more than the 5700X3D and requires a bit more investment in the motherboard and RAM since it's DDR5. For that extra cost, you're looking at about a 20 to 25% performance boost. As for the 9800X3D, it currently costs more than 3 times what the 5700X3D does because of inflated prices right now due to availability. While you're not getting a 300% increase in performance, it is the best gaming CPU you can buy today, bar none. At the end of the day, everyone has different budgets, preferences, and ideas when it comes to value. I hope this comparison helped you get a clearer picture of the differences and gave you a better idea of what's worth your hard-earned cash. That's all I've got for this one. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel, and consider using the pyurologie affiliate links in the video description below to grab your parts and help support the channel. Otherwise, thanks for stopping by, and I'll catch you in the next one.